Part 1. When I look back, I can see the signs, little red flags that I brushed aside, convinced that our love was stronger than whatever shadows loomed in the corners of our lives. My name is Adam, and up until recently, I thought I had a perfect marriage with Mary. We've been together for nearly a decade, married for 7 years, and parents to our beautiful son, Noah. Noah was 5 years old. He had Mary's bright blue eyes and my unruly dark hair, a little ball of energy and mischief despite the sickness that gnawed at him. Noah was born deaf. He couldn't hear the world around him, the laughter of other kids, the music Mary used to dance to, or the sound of my voice when I read him bedtime stories. The doctors said it was incurable, that he would never hear, and we had spent the past 5 years learning to communicate in ways that didn't involve sound. I worked as a project manager for a construction firm, and Mary was a part-time yoga instructor. She had started teaching classes again about a year ago, saying it was important for her to have something outside of being a mom. I agreed. If anything, I was grateful she found an outlet to cope with the stress of raising a child with special needs. We had been taking turns taking Noah to his therapy sessions, trading off shifts so one of us could keep working while the other stayed with him. But somewhere along the way, things began to change. Mary started spending more time out of the house. She said it was yoga, then coffee with friends, then helping out at a local charity. I didn't question it at first. Why would I? Mary was the love of my life, my college sweetheart, the woman who had stood by me through every high and low. She had been my anchor, and I was blind to the idea that she could be anything else. One evening, after a long shift at work, I came home to find her sitting on the couch, staring into nothingness. Noah was asleep in his room, his tiny fingers curled around his favorite stuffed rabbit. I sat next to her, brushing her hair away from her face. "Mary, you okay?" I asked. She blinked, as if coming back from somewhere far away, and forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." I pulled her into a hug, feeling the stiffness in her body. She had been distant lately, our conversations reduced to logistics, our intimacy a mere echo of what it once was. I assumed it was the stress, that maybe she was breaking under the weight of raising a child who would never hear her say, "I love you." I had no idea that her world had begun spinning around someone else. It was about a week later that I first heard his name, Jake. I had stopped by Mary's favorite coffee shop to pick up her usual vanilla latte before heading to Noah's therapy session. The barista behind the counter, a young guy with sandy hair and a charming grin, seemed to know her order by heart. "Hey, you're Mary's husband, right?" he asked as he handed me the cup. "Yeah," I said, caught off guard. "You know my wife?" "Yeah, she comes in here all the time. She's awesome. Always so upbeat." I nodded, forcing a polite smile as I walked away. A part of me felt a pang of unease, but I buried it. What was there to worry about? But the seed had been planted. The next few weeks were a blur. Noah's therapy sessions became more demanding, and Mary and I spent most of our days coordinating schedules, taking him to appointments, and learning new ways to communicate with him. Mary was always there, always doting, but there were moments when she seemed absent. She would slip out for coffee, claiming she needed fresh air, but she'd come back looking different. Flushed, her hair hastily pulled into a messy bun, lips slightly swollen as if she had been biting them. I told myself I was paranoid, that I was imagining things. Until one evening, as I sat beside Noah's bed, watching him sleep peacefully, my phone buzzed. It was a text from one of Mary's friends, Sarah, a sweet woman who had become part of our support system over the years. "Hey, just checking in. Haven't seen Mary at yoga lately. Is everything okay?" My stomach dropped. Mary had said she was at yoga that morning, and the morning before. She had been coming home in her workout clothes, her mat slung over her shoulder, the faint scent of lavender clinging to her skin. I responded casually, trying not to tip my hand. "Yeah, all good. She's been pretty busy. I'll let her know you said hi." Sarah sent back a thumbs up, and I sat there, my mind racing. I knew I needed to ask Mary, but I didn't want to believe where my thoughts were leading me. I didn't want to confront the possibility that my wife might be lying to me while our son lay in his bed, unable to hear the lullaby she used to sing to him. I decided to wait, to watch. The truth, as it turned out, was darker than I could have ever imagined. Part 2. The days that followed were a blur of routine and suspicion. I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, that Mary was just overwhelmed with the stress of raising Noah, of balancing therapy appointments and finding moments of normalcy. But the doubts were persistent, gnawing at me, keeping me awake at night. I started paying closer attention. I watched the way she would check her phone, her fingers moving quickly across the screen before she'd tuck it away as if she didn't want me to see. I noticed the way her eyes would flicker with some emotion I couldn't read, a flash of guilt or maybe sadness. She was pulling away from me, and I was too scared to confront her about it. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, Mary came downstairs dressed in a casual sundress that clung to her curves. Her hair was down, waves falling over her shoulders, and she had put on a touch of makeup. "You look nice," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Got plans today?" She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second before she smiled. "Just meeting up with Sarah. I haven't seen her in a while, and I could use some girl time." I nodded, forcing a smile. "That's great. You deserve a break." She leaned in, kissed my cheek, and for a moment I could almost believe everything was normal. But as I watched her leave, my gut twisted. I grabbed my phone and texted Sarah. "Hey, hope you and Mary have a fun day. She really needs it." Sarah's response came almost immediately. "Oh, I wish. I'm stuck at work today. I'll call her later to catch up though. Hope everything's okay." I stood there, my heart pounding so loudly I could feel it in my throat. Mary had lied. She wasn't meeting Sarah. So where was she going? I called in sick to work that day, telling myself it was just to clear my head, to get some rest. But the truth was, I needed to know. I needed to see it with my own eyes, to understand why she felt the need to lie to me. I followed her. I hated myself for it, hated the way my hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, keeping a safe distance behind her car. She drove across town, to a neighborhood I didn't recognize, and pulled into the parking lot of a small cafe. I watched from my car as she walked inside. A few minutes later, he showed up. The young barista, Jake. He looked even younger out of his work uniform, dressed casually in jeans and a t-shirt. He smiled when he saw her, and she beamed back, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in months. They sat by the window, laughing, leaning in close. Mary reached across the table, her fingers brushing his hand, and he didn't pull away. I felt sick. My body was frozen, my mind screaming at me to get out of there, to turn away before I saw something I couldn't forget. But I couldn't move. I watched them laugh, watched Jake reach up to tuck a strand of hair behind Mary's ear, watched her blush. I stayed until they stood to leave. Mary hugged him tightly, lingering just a little too long before she finally let go. I ducked down in my seat, my heart slamming against my ribs as she walked back to her car and drove away. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, trying to catch my breath. It felt like my chest was caving in, like someone had ripped my heart out and left a hollow ache in its place. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw something just to hear it shatter. But nothing came out. I was numb. By the time I made it back home, I was exhausted. Mary was already there, in the kitchen making dinner, her face a perfect mask of normalcy. She looked up and smiled at me, the same smile that had once made me fall in love with her. "How was your day?" she asked casually, her voice light and cheerful. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, to force her to tell me why she was seeing him, why she was lying to me. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I forced a smile. "It was fine. I lied. Just the usual." She nodded, turning back to the stove, humming softly to herself. I watched her, feeling like I was seeing a stranger standing in my kitchen. How long had she been lying to me? How long had she been pretending that everything was fine? I barely ate that night. I watched her laugh with Noah, signing to him as he giggled and played with his food, completely oblivious to the storm brewing around him. I watched the way Mary looked at him, the love in her eyes, and wondered how she could lie so easily, how she could betray us and come home to smile at our son. That night, I lay awake beside her, listening to her even breathing as she slept. I stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying the image of her smiling at Jake, the way she had touched him, the way she had lied to my face without even blinking. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't pretend that everything was okay. I needed answers. The truth was there, lurking just beneath the surface, and I was going to tear it out no matter how much it hurt. Part 3. I spent the next few days in a fog, going through the motions of daily life while my mind was consumed by questions. Why Jake? How long had it been going on? How could she look me in the eye and lie so easily? Every time Mary smiled at me, every time she touched my hand, I felt sick. I was torn between wanting to confront her and wanting to cling to the illusion that everything was okay. But I couldn't live like that. Not knowing. Not when our family was at stake. I needed proof. Something undeniable. Something she couldn't explain away. So I did the one thing I never thought I would do. I went through her phone. It felt wrong, like I was violating her privacy, but she had already violated my trust. It took days to work up the nerve. I waited until she was in the shower, her phone charging on the nightstand. My hands shook as I unlocked it. She trusted me enough to know her password, and the thought twisted the knife even deeper. I went straight to her messages, scrolling through her conversations, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear my own thoughts. Most of it was harmless, texts with her friends, reminders about Noah's therapy sessions, grocery lists. But then I found it. A conversation with a contact saved as Jay. I opened the thread, and my stomach dropped. It was him. Jake. Had a great time today. You looked beautiful. You always say that. But thank you. You make me feel beautiful. My fingers tightened around the phone, my vision blurring. I kept scrolling, reading their messages, watching my life fall apart one text at a time. They had been meeting up for weeks, maybe longer. Little rendezvous at the cafe, stolen moments while I was at work or with Noah at his therapy sessions. The worst part wasn't the flirtation or the sweet words. It was the way she talked to him, the way she shared parts of herself she had stopped sharing with me. She told him about her fears, her dreams, her frustrations. She confided in him about Noah, about how hard it was to be the mother of a child who would never hear her voice. Sometimes I feel like I'm failing him, she had written. I just want to feel alive again. Jake's response was like a dagger to my chest. You deserve to be happy, Mary. To feel alive. I wish I could give you that. There were no explicit confessions, no declarations of love, but I didn't need them. I knew what I was looking at. It was emotional infidelity, at the very least. But my gut told me it was more. My mind filled with images of them together, of her lying to me so she could be with him. I felt sick. I barely made it to the bathroom before I threw up, my body rejecting the truth I had just uncovered. I sat on the cold tile floor, her phone still clutched in my hand, my head spinning. I wanted to break something, to scream, to wake her up and demand answers. But I didn't. I put her phone back on the nightstand, exactly where I had found it, and walked out of the bedroom, my hands still shaking. I spent the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying their words over and over again. By morning, I was exhausted but resolute. I needed more. I needed to know how deep this went, how long she had been lying to me. The next day, I bought a small recording device. It felt like a betrayal, but she had already betrayed me. I needed to hear it from her own mouth. I needed to know the truth. I planted the device in her car, tucked underneath the driver's seat where she wouldn't find it. It was voice-activated, recording whenever there was noise. I felt sick as I did it, my hands trembling, my heart pounding in my chest. But I needed answers. I needed to hear her admit it. The waiting was agony. Every time she left the house, every time she said she was going to yoga or meeting a friend, I wondered if she was with him. I tortured myself with images of them together, laughing, touching, kissing. I watched her with Noah, the way she looked at him with love and tenderness, and I wondered how she could be two different people at once. 3 days later, I retrieved the recorder. I waited until she was asleep, until her soft breathing filled the room, before I plugged it into my laptop and hit play. At first, it was just mundane noises, her starting the car, the radio playing softly. She sang along to a song, her voice light and carefree, and for a moment I almost convinced myself that I was wrong, that I was being paranoid. But then I heard his voice. Hey, beautiful. My body went cold. I listened as she laughed, the sound so genuine, so full of joy. Hey, you. I missed you. I listened to them talk, to the way she confided in him, the way she laughed at his jokes, the way she talked about me like I was just a distant obligation. Adam's been so busy with work and Noah's therapy. I feel like I'm just existing. Like I'm invisible. Jake's voice was gentle, soothing. You're not invisible to me. You're everything to me. Then there was silence. I knew what was happening, even though I couldn't see it. My chest tightened, my throat burning as I fought the urge to cry. I heard her whisper his name, heard the soft rustling of clothes, the muffled sounds of a kiss. I couldn't listen anymore. I ripped the headphones off, my hands shaking, while rising in my throat. It was real. She was with him. She was betraying me, betraying our family. The woman I loved, the mother of my child, was a liar. And now, I had the proof. I sat there in the darkness, the cold truth settling into my bones. There was no going back. Nothing would ever be the same. I knew what I had to do. Part 4. I didn't sleep that night. I sat alone in the darkness, replaying the recording over and over until the words were seared into my brain. Her laughter, his voice, the unmistakable sounds of betrayal. I felt like I was suffocating, drowning in a sea of lies. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my family, it was all a mirage. The next morning, I watched her move around the kitchen, making breakfast, humming softly to herself. She looked so normal, so peaceful. I wondered how she could live with herself, how she could stand there pretending to be my wife, pretending to be Noah's mother, when she was sneaking around behind my back. Noah sat at the table, his little hands moving clumsily as he signed juice. Mary laughed, pouring him a glass, brushing his hair out of his eyes with all the affection of a devoted mother. I felt my chest tighten, anger boiling under my skin. How could she do this to him? How could she risk tearing apart our family? I couldn't look at her. I left without saying goodbye, my heart pounding as I drove away. I needed to clear my head, to think. But everywhere I went, I saw them. I saw her laughing with him, touching him, giving him the parts of herself she used to give to me. I ended up at the park, the one where we used to take Noah before everything went to hell. I sat on a bench, watching other parents play with their kids, wondering how many of them were living a lie just like me. How many smiles were forced. How many marriages were built on foundations of deceit. I felt like I was falling apart, like my entire world was crumbling beneath my feet. I had loved her. I had trusted her. I had built my life around her, and she had destroyed it without a second thought. I thought about confronting her, about screaming at her, about making her feel the pain she had inflicted on me. But I knew it wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't take away the betrayal, the humiliation. It wouldn't fix our broken family. I went home that evening, my mind made up. I was going to end it. I was going to take Noah, the house, everything. She didn't deserve any of it. Mary was in the living room, folding laundry, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Hey, you're home early," she said, her voice warm and familiar, as if nothing was wrong. I stared at her, my throat tightening. I couldn't believe I had been so blind. I had loved this woman, devoted my life to her, and she had been lying to me the entire time. "Yeah," I said, forcing the words out. I needed to get out of the office. She walked over, wrapping her arms around me, resting her head on my chest. I stood there, stiff and unresponsive, the smell of her perfume filling my nose. It was the same perfume she wore on the recording, the same scent she had carried back from him. I wanted to push her away, to scream at her, to tell her I knew. But I didn't. Not yet. I played along, pretending everything was fine, smiling when she asked about my day, laughing at her jokes, even kissing her goodnight. I felt sick, like I was losing myself in the lies, like I was becoming just as deceitful as she was. I waited until she was asleep before I went into the office and pulled out the paperwork. I had already called a lawyer, already started the process of taking everything away from her. The house, the custody, the life she had taken for granted. She didn't deserve to be Noah's mother. She didn't deserve to come home to this house, to the life we had built together. She had chosen to destroy it, and now she was going to live with the consequences. The next morning, I called my parents. I told them everything. The lies, the affair, the betrayal. My mom cried, my dad cursed, but they promised to support me, to help me get through this. They offered to take Noah for a few days while I figured everything out. I went back inside, my heart heavy as I watched Mary sign to Noah, her face soft and loving. It made me sick. She didn't deserve his love. She didn't deserve the family she was destroying. I felt the anger rise up, hot and overwhelming. I wanted to hurt her, to make her feel the pain she had inflicted on me. I wanted her to know what it felt like to lose everything. That evening, I waited until Noah was asleep before I confronted her. I stood in the doorway, watching her fold his tiny clothes, her face peaceful, oblivious to the storm about to hit her. "I know," I said, my voice cold and steady. She looked up, her face confused. "Know what?" "About Jake," I spat, watching the color drain from her face. "About all the times you lied to me, all the times you were with him instead of at yoga." "I know everything, Mary." She opened her mouth, her eyes wide with shock, but no words came out. She looked terrified, like a deer caught in headlights, and for a moment I felt a sick sense of satisfaction. "You're a liar," I said, my voice shaking. "You're a cheat, and you're a terrible mother." She choked out a sob, her hands shaking as she covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes, spilling over as she sank to her knees. "Adam, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Don't you dare apologize," I hissed. "Don't you dare try to justify this. You did this. You ruined our family. You betrayed me. You betrayed Noah. You destroyed everything. She broke down, sobbing, her shoulders shaking as she clung to the edge of the bed. But I felt nothing. No pity, no compassion. Just cold, burning anger. I'm taking Noah, I said, my voice like steel. I'm taking him. I'm taking the house, and you're going to be left with nothing. You don't deserve him. You don't deserve us. She looked up at me, her face twisted in pain, but I turned away, my heart like stone. She could cry all she wanted. She could beg for forgiveness, but it wouldn't change anything. She had made her choice. And now, she was going to live with the consequences. Part 5. The days that followed were a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and tears. Mary tried calling and texting, even showing up at my parents' house, but I refused to see her. I couldn't stand the sight of her. The thought of her touching me, kissing me, all while she was with him made me sick. I moved out the next day, taking Noah with me. I didn't tell him much, just that we were going on an adventure, staying with Grandma and Grandpa for a while. He didn't understand my words, but his bright blue eyes followed my signs, curious and confused. I exaggerated my movements, forcing a smile. He grinned back, excited to pack his favorite toys into his backpack. Mary was frantic when she realized I was taking him. She followed me to the car, tears streaming down her face as she tried to get my attention. I kept my back to her, my eyes on Noah, who was happily buckling himself in. She grabbed my arm, forcing me to face her, her hands trembling as she signed, "Please, don't take him. I need him." I looked at her, my jaw clenched, my heart a cold, heavy stone. "You stopped being his mother the moment you chose Jake over us." She collapsed, her body shaking with sobs as I strapped Noah in. He watched her curiously, his small hands signing, "Mommy sad?" I hesitated, my heart aching, but I forced a smile and signed back, "She'll be okay. We're going on an adventure." He clapped his hands, his world still pure, untouched by the betrayal that had shattered mine. I filed for full custody the next day. The lawyer said I had a strong case, Mary's infidelity and neglect were undeniable. The texts, the recordings, the timeline of her deceit painted a clear picture of her betrayal. Mary tried to fight back. She begged me to reconsider, pleaded with me to go to counseling, to try to work things out for Noah's sake. But I was done. I was finished pretending, finished living a lie. She showed up at my parents' house one afternoon, banging on the door, demanding to see Noah. I stood firm, blocking the doorway. Her hands moved rapidly, signing, "Please. I made a mistake. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant to hurt Noah." I felt the anger boiling inside me, hot and consuming. "You didn't just hurt us, Mary. You destroyed us. You broke our family. You broke me." She sank to her knees, her shoulders shaking. "Please. I'll do anything. I'll leave him. I'll fix this. Please." I looked down at her, my heart hardened by betrayal. "You can't fix this. You can't undo what you did. You can't take back the lies, the pain." Her fingers trembled, her eyes pleading. "I love you. I love Noah. Please. I need my family." I shook my head, my jaw tight. "You don't get to say that. You don't get to claim love after what you did." I stepped back, cold and unyielding. "Go home, Mary. This is over." I shut the door, her muffled sobs echoing through the wood as I walked away. I felt numb, empty, like all the love I had once felt for her had been ripped out, leaving a hollow ache in its place. The divorce was finalized a few months later. The judge granted me full custody, citing Mary's infidelity and emotional neglect. She was allowed visitation rights, but only under supervision. Noah adjusted slowly, his questions about Mary becoming less frequent as time went on. He stopped signing Mommy at bedtime, stopped looking for her at the playground, stopped asking when we were going home. He adapted, the way children do, finding comfort in the stability I provided. I poured everything into being his father, into giving him the love and security he needed. I refused to let him feel the loss, the betrayal, the pain. I refused to let him suffer for Mary's mistakes. It was hard. I won't lie. There were nights when I broke down, nights when the anger and grief consumed me, nights when I wondered how I was going to raise a deaf child on my own. But I got through it. I had to. For Noah, Mary tried to rebuild her life. She moved out of the house, got an apartment across town. I heard she was still seeing Jake, but I didn't care. She was nothing to me now, just a stranger with a familiar face. I focused on Noah, on our new life, on moving forward. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fair, but it was real. It was honest. And after everything, That was all I wanted. The love I once had for Mary was gone, burned away by lies and betrayal. But my love for Noah was stronger than ever. He was my son, my world, my purpose. We survived, we rebuilt, and we moved on. Because in the end, love is not about words or promises. It's about actions. And Mary's actions spoke louder than any apology ever could. I chose to live in truth. And that was enough. The end.